Please explain to our viewers how one's race and zip code impacts the type of health care one receives in America.
One's race and zip code affects the kind of health care you have in America, but even more important, it affects the kind of health you have in America. So that poverty is definitely a health risk. There's no question. There's 3 times more likelihood that a child will grow up in poverty if they're in a black family than if they're in a white family. The deck of cards is stacked against the folks who are economically in an economically disadvantaged position in the United States. A lot of that has to do not so much with the health care that they receive, though it can, and people can be deprived of access to health care, they can be deprived of access to drugs they need for economic reasons. But the bigger part of the health problem is the inferior health of the community and the state and the nation as a whole. And African Americans get the short end of that by far. Before the pandemic hit, Americans lived 3.8 years less than the citizens of the other wealthy countries. And that despite the fact that we're spending about $2 trillion extra each year on healthcare compared to those other countries. Now it's up to $2.3 trillion difference. But after the pandemic in 2021, or not after, but 2 years into the pandemic, our deficit went from 3.8 years shorter lives to 6.3 years shorter lives. Did I say that right?
In a 2 year span?
Yeah, 2.5 years. We lost 2.5 years of our longevity. Now, we're supposed to have the best health care in the world, and we're paying about twice as much per person as the other wealthy countries are. And our longevity was 3.8 years less before the pandemic and 6.3 years less 2 years into the pandemic. But a key fact here is that that loss of years of life was not equally distributed between white people and black people. So overall, it was overall, we lost 2.5 years of life expectancy. But for white folks, it was 2 years. Jesus, I'm sorry.
No, I think we're back at it.
Okay. Okay. It's like a band that hasn't been on the road for. So overall, Americans lost 2.5 years of longevity between 2019, before the pandemic started, and 2021. But it wasn't equal for blacks and whites. For white folks, they lost 2.4 years of life. The average was 2.5 for the country. But for black folks, they lost 4 years. So what we're seeing is that your health is determined not just by your zip code, but by what country you live in. And within this country, the black folks come out on the short end of this. What does it have to do with? Some of it has to do with lesser access to health care. But there was a crucial study that was done that kind of shows the misdirection and the gross misdirection in American healthcare. Study, it was published in 2004, and it looked at the quality of care that Medicare patients received and how much money was spent, the relationship between quality and money. And what it found is exactly the opposite of what you'd expect. The states in which more money was spent on Medicare patients had the lowest quality. Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, Georgia, Florida. Those states had the lowest quality medicine. And this is an incredibly important study because Medicare is a great equalizer. That takes away the economic discrimination for people over 65. They have the same insurance. So what happens? Instead of spending equal amounts of money for black folks and white folks and folks in different states, there's more money that's spent in the poorer states and a lower quality of care. And that kind of shows the lie of American medicine, that its purpose is not to make people optimally healthy most efficiently as possible. That's not its purpose. Its purpose is to harvest money out of the population. And when Medicare came in and equalized the payments, what happened is that the quality went down when people got more health care because they were covered.
A question I have is, I see a correlation between education and the healthcare system, especially in low-income areas.
Yes.
In your experience or your exposure, do lower quality doctors tend to be put or stay in low-income areas?
I think in general, there are idealistic folks of all colors and economic circumstances, and they do what they think is the right thing to do based on their principles. But I think for the most part, docs do what is predictable based on their economic opportunity. So I don't have data on the racial distribution of docs, but I do on the difference between MDs and osteopaths. So the osteopaths, and you don't hear people say, I turned down medical school because I wanted to go to osteopathic school. I haven't heard that. I'm sure there's some people who do. But basically, it's folks who don't get into medical school at that stage in their life. They go to osteopathic school, but then you can go into a residency, an MD residency, and you come out. Now, for example, the state of West Virginia started an osteopathic school because they needed rural docs. And they thought if they trained osteopaths, they'd be more likely to stay in West Virginia and treat the underserved populations in West Virginia. What happens is the docs distribute the way anyone would economically. So if they can make more money elsewhere, if they can do jobs that are better paying and less demanding.
Too, yeah.
I'm sorry?
It will have a lighter load too, right? Depending on where you are.
Yes. And paradoxically, the primary care doc has to take care of everything, whereas the specialist has intensive training and puts years into training. But once they're through with that training, they're only responsible for a narrow part of information, of having that information at their fingertips, ready to see a patient, whereas a primary care doc has to be ready for anything that walks in the door. So it's a whole lot of that responsibility that specialists don't have. I'm partial to primary care docs coming out on the short end. So I think I'm sure if you train more black folks, you'll get more doctors who take care of black folks. But you're going to lose a lot too to people who are going to distribute by their economic opportunity.